Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're now moving from the European to the global stage, from the Euro crisis to the Western position in the global game. My name is Kleine-Brockhoff. I'm a fellow at the German Marshall Fund in Washington. Let's start with the crisis when it erupted about 4 years ago. It has jumped the Atlantic a couple of times. Starting with the financial crisis into in the US, into a European crisis that we've just discussed in the previous panel. Tim Garton-Ash calls it a crisis of Western financial capitalism. Clearly, it could jump the Atlantic once more. I'll just mention the term fiscal cliff. When the crisis started, there was a theory out there. Many analysts said the Western societies will overcome this crisis faster than China. And that's because open societies, free market societies, are able to adapt, are able to first deleverage, secondly to reform. And steered, managed economies are much harder, will have a much harder time of doing that. That clearly wasn't the case. The growth differential between the emerging powers and China and the West continues, actually grows. The crisis has so far been an accelerator of a trend. It hasn't broken the trend. So let's assume this discussion wants to assume that the West restructures. The question that the organizers have put out here is, will global economic restructuring bring the West back to game? That is the question we're going to put to our panelists. Here to discuss this with us is, first of all, a group of young diplomatic professionals who have a forum outside this room. They're connected with us through this instrument, so we can get their questions. But here with us today is the Foreign Minister of Croatia, Pusic, the Minister for European Affairs from France, Mr. Cazeneuve, and his translator. He will follow the conversation in English, but will prefer to speak in French. And our host, Mr. Rinkevics, Foreign Minister of Latvia. So let me start with the host. Has something major happened? Has something irreversible happened? Or will the restructuring that we've been talking about in the previous session either restore the position that certainly Europe has enjoyed in the past in the globalization game, or will some intermediate outcome be the case? Some speak of a zero-sum game as the possible outcome of this crisis.
Well, good evening, and I want to first of all congratulate organizers of this conference with combining live discussion here in this room with tweeting. I myself, I am very active user of Twitter, actually. Once was called Twitter Minister, and most of the Latvian cabinet really enjoys this tool. But I really do hope that I will be able to refrain for about 1 hour, not tweeting out of here of panel, but trying to,
we'll make sure of that.
To answer questions and to be part of discussion. Answering to your question, I would actually say that if we look at economic crisis, financial crisis that European Union has actually endured already for more than 3 years, I would say that I wouldn't see kind of very dramatic change if we talk about the role of the European Union in the global processes, in the global posture in some foreign policy. If you look at some facts, for instance, EU still is the largest contributor to development aid in the world. With all the hardships, with all the financial difficulties we have, we still are providing most of this part of development aid, and this is a very powerful tool. If you look at defense, it has been quite a long-standing debate that Europe should have done more, should do more in a defense field. But still, it's not so much about money. I think there have been a lot of money so far. It's more about political will in the national level, also at the European level, to work on this issue, to bring more coordination, to bring more defense capability together. If we look at structures that have been created by the Lisbon Treaty, like European External Action Service, well, it's now working for about almost 3 years. Lady Ashton is doing a lot of work. Actually, we have seen some trends, like I have been also ministers of foreign affairs of the presidency countries now stepping in and assisting her in doing some of particular work. So we see also that this part is developing. Of course, you can always expect more. There have been quite a complaint about not enough financing of the whole EAS, but what we see is certainly that this service is also working. Now, if we look at perceptions, then yes, of course, we have, again, as it has been quite discussed also in the first panel, quite a gloomy perceptions, quite a gloomy discussions about the declining role of the West, the declining role of the EU. But actually, just prior to this conference, we had a very interesting small group scenario playing called Riga process, where we were actually analyzing how would probably more integration, political integration, economic, financial integration of the European Union influence also the role of Europe, of the European Union in the world. And actually we came up with four kind of scenarios, which is one: full integration, partial integration, full fragmentation, or partial fragmentation. And what we have actually concluded that none of those models would be perfect, and none of those models would actually imply that there would be quite a change for the role of Europe. There could be certainly some shifts, and probably not all people would be very happy with very integrated, mighty Europe outside of the European Union. My final point, which I want to say, is that we in the Baltics, and I was also a bit surprised by the first panel, tend to be very optimistic this time about some certain events. If it comes to the whole development of the EU foreign policy, EU security policy under the situation of crisis, I think that again, what we have seen, there have been quite terrific examples. A couple of months ago, when we were debating sanctions against Syria and Iran, when it came to Iran, then actually European Union Foreign Affairs Council was taking into account the fact that, for instance, Greece was dependent on Iranian oil for about 70%. And while we were taking certain actions, we also ensured that interests of particular member states are taken into account, that solidarity applies. I think that we see very good examples of coordinated approach to many issues. What we would have probably hoped, and I do hope that it's going to develop, is more solidarity when we talk about joint foreign policy, joint actions vis-à-vis eastern neighborhood, southern neighborhood, and certainly also to see more coordinated actions vis-à-vis also countries like China, like Russia, like countries of Latin America, and so on. But at the end, I would say that even with all those debates that we have right now within the European Union, outside of the European Union, what we see is certainly that the EU is still attractive. Still there are countries that want to become EU members, and we will be very happy to welcome Croatia next year in the European Union, and we hope also that actually by the very enlargement of the EU we are going still to address also issues of stability, security within the region and actually globally. So when it comes to EU and NATO relations, then it's a bit different role, but I'll stop here and probably you can engage into discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Pusic, you represent the 28th member of the European Union as of next year. When you started accession, the European Union was a synonym for affluence and for first of all, for a return to Europe, for your country, but also for a global position that you would enjoy coming into the European Union. Some of these assumptions are now being challenged by the European crisis. How do you see that package of issues from a Croatian perspective?
Thank you very much for this question, and also thank you for giving me an opportunity to be here, and thank you to Edgars, we started this, I think, very interesting and potentially promising conversation, Baltic-Adriatic or North-South, with maybe some more things that connect us, and I think from what I will say, you will see that maybe there are more things that connect us than we could have concluded from the previous debate. But it is true what you said, and in a way this was maybe the most interesting learning experience about the nature of the European Union, and maybe also what are the possible remedies, or in which direction we could look for the remedies of the situation we are in, or more precisely the perception of the situation we are in. European Union was a completely different ballgame when we started. I always think of 2001 as the year when Croatia started its accession towards the European Union, because that was the year when we ratified the Stabilization Association Agreement. Also, Croatia was a very, very different country in that year. So in the last 11, 12 years, Croatia has changed dramatically. I would say it's a different country now from what it was 11, 12 years ago. And here a little footnote to the conditionality debate that we heard later. Conditionality has obviously this characteristic that it works only on societies and countries that actually really want something. It doesn't work on you if it's about something that you're not particularly interested in, or you have a divided public opinion on. It only works if you've made up your mind and set your sights at a certain goal and then want to go there. But anyway, we were certainly different, and European Union was different. And actually, I think it was more different politically than economically and financially, although that might sound a little odd to say that. Sorry about this, there's something in the back. If you think of the 2004, the year that sort of the Big Bang Eastern Europe year, where the East European countries joined the European Union, the whole experience was an experience of almost like the last move or the absolute end of the Cold War. It was reuniting Europe. European Union was at that time affluent. The key figures of those years were people like Michnik and Havel and Geremek, were political leaders, were people who came. The key values and the key slogans were slogans such as democracy, freedom, human rights, openness. Those were, even the economic freedoms were seen more in the context of freedom than in the context of free market in the narrow sense. Now when we are entering, the key figure is Mario Draghi. The concepts such as democracy, that is almost like a little bit embarrassing to mention it. The concepts of freedom, solidarity. I mean, Eastern Europe, in a way, the Polish, not only trade union, but whole notion and concept of solidarity was almost a pars pro toto for Eastern Europe joining the free world. The solidarity is a value that has almost completely disappeared as concept. And I know and understand that austerity and poverty, or at least a sense that there is a threat of poverty, isn't a big friend of generosity or a big friend of solidarity or even thinking about political or lofty political goals. But at the same time, I would say that in spite of all the problems, the European market is still the richest market in the world. The quality of life in Europe altogether is still probably the best or thereabouts, the qualities of life on the planet. So in spite of all the economic problems that maybe are also on the verge of being solved at the moment, something that has changed, and I would say in my perception, and I was following this process and actively participating in Croatia in this process for the last 11, 12 years. The thing that has changed the most is a sense of political direction. The sense of where are we going with this? Where do we want to go with this? Why are we part of this? Is there something more to it than just keeping these countries together and making trade easier? And in that sense, I think that the important balance between the economic aspect of the integration and the political aspect of it. And by political integration here, I don't necessarily mean federalization in the sense that has been mentioned in the last few days, but mean more political integration in terms of sharing political goals and values, sharing political values in our foreign policy, in viewing the development of our societies at home, in defining the goals of our policies at home. In a way, I think that dominance of economic topics and financial topics over political topics in the original sense of the word has created a disbalance between competition or conflict and cooperation, which you have to have. You have to have some kind of, I think, for good functioning of every society, or a broader union like the European Union, a balance between competition and cooperation. And in that sense, I think that has also changed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cazeneuve, how does the euro crisis, in your view, affect Europe's global position, and what needs to be done to get to what our title says, to get Europe back to the game?
I wanted to speak in French in order to be very precise, but I'm going to try to speak in English. If my English is not fluent, be kind with me. I'm going to do my best, because I have begun to learn English last week in order to speak with you today. So for me it's a tremendous effort, but I'm going to do my best. And I'm going to try to answer very precisely to your question. First of all, we are confronted in the world, and especially in Europe, to a deep crisis. Everywhere everywhere in Europe, in France, is the case. It's also the case everywhere in the world. The level of debts and deficits are very high, especially in Europe. It's the case also in France. We're confronted to a high level of unemployment. The level of growth is very low. And the situation of Europe in the world, because of the globalization of the economies, present to the world a systemic risk. So we have to find together a certain number of solutions in order to overcome the crisis. And we have to do that especially in Europe, because Europe is a continent with strong economies, innovation, strong industries, a high level of integration, banks which were efficient during the last 20 years, and we should be unable to succeed in creating the conditions of growth in Europe and in the world without good solutions on our continent. What can we do? First, we want in France, and that's what the new president of France said when he arrived at the responsibility in Europe. It's absolutely necessary to have budgetary discipline in Europe. In France, we would like to decrease strongly the level of debts and deficits. But we are sure that we shall not succeed in reaching the target if we are unable to create the condition of growth in Europe. That's why we proposed during the last European summit in June to have a growth compact with the fiscal compact in order to have both budgetary discipline and a growth compact with a certain number of decisions, especially 3 decisions. The first decision was 120 billion euros with structural funds, the mobilization of the Industrial European Bank, the project bonds. All those decisions, it was a way of saying to the world, of course we are aware that it's absolutely necessary to have budgetary discipline, but we shall not be able to decrease the level of debts and deficit without a strong decision for growth for the future. The second decision was concerning the banks in Europe, because there is this systemic risk. The crisis is due to the decision of the bank to speculate rather than financing the real economy. So we have to organize the supervision of banks in Europe. It's very important to have a good supervision of the banks in Europe in order to organize the financing of the economy by a good organization of the financial institution. We have to go further with a mechanism of resolution of the bank crisis. And we have also to put on the table new guarantees for people who are putting their money in the bank and who don't want to be confronted to risk. And we also to have more solidarity, more monetary solidarity. That's why we were happy when we've decided together to organize the recapitalization of banks by the European Mechanism for Stability. And we have decided to organize the recapitalization of banks with the European Mechanism of Stability after the supervision of banks. in order to put all the system in order. The European Central Bank decided to go further during the last months, and the president of the European Central Bank said that he will do all what is possible in order to stop speculation on the market. It's a way of explaining that to the speculation in the world, that we are able in Europe to organize strong firewall in front of speculation. All those decisions are creating a kind of New Deal in Europe. It's very important because if we succeed in creating the condition of growth in Europe by this decision, all the other countries in the world economy confronted to the globalization of the economy will be able to create for their own part the same condition.
Minister Rinkevics, you've said Europe's power of attraction is still there. You've quoted, and rightly so, your colleague from Croatia. But when you look further afield, is that still the case? If you look, let's say, into Asia, China is trying to acquire soft power, and the question is Europe losing soft power? Is Europe losing attraction? Does Europe, by way of the crises, lose its agenda-setting power? Is it further a model for regional integration? I think African countries might look at regional integration differently now. So please look for me at the power of attraction rather from further afield, from a global perspective. Who wants to start with this?
Say a few words. I don't know whether Europe is losing its attraction. I think it's reaching its geographical borders. And, Europe, there is just that much Europe. And after that, it's not Europe. And after that, it's other countries. And they have maybe other forms of integration and other interests and other markets and other goals and objectives and things that they want to share. And it's really now the question of borderlands, let's say, or the countries mostly in southeastern Europe, so it's in our region, and in the so-called eastern countries of the Eastern Partnership, to see to what extent the attraction of Europe is still there. And for these countries, it's, I would say that the attraction is maybe more stability, political, institutional stability, state-building aspect of it, and then, of course, also the common market and the economic aspect of it. And in that sense, the attraction of Europe isn't gone. I mean, it's still a condensed, structured experience of about 15 countries, let's say, although there are 27 members, but no, when you look at the experience of the institution building, in one place, that gives you some kind of guidelines for all the countries that didn't have such long histories in terms of their own institutions, to use for their own stability. And I don't think that this is losing attraction. And I think that Europe shouldn't disregard these countries either, because I think that these countries shouldn't lose their own attraction for Europe, that Europe should be interested in them because it's broadening its influence in neighborhoods that are key neighborhoods, such as Middle East and the Eastern Europe.
But let me try to challenge that by asking your two colleagues. That may be the case for the question of accession and neighborhood, but attractiveness is not just simply accession. It's one dimension of it, but global norms, values, attractiveness of Europe Europe's soft power is a larger concept, and as seen from China, that may be different. Mr. Rinkevics.
Well, I just want to add a couple of points. First of all, if you look at European Union as a kind of model of integrations, and let's face it, it's a very unique model. And I think that if we start to speak about some certain further steps in political integration, I think that the idea of the United States of Europe has been mentioned already more than once and more than in one decade. Of course, we cannot actually put European integration according to, let's say, American model or something else. It's very unique. First of all, it's based, as Vesna has said, on sets of values. Actually, the whole European integration was started to address not economic or financial issues so much as to address peace and stability in Europe just after the World War II. And it gradually developed into economic, financial, also to very much extent also political union. But if we speak about the attractiveness, then it's not only about the neighborhood we are still talking. And certainly, if we will not be able to solve the current financial, economic, as well as political problems at the European level, but also in member states, and if we look at publics, then what we are currently addressing, and that's a big challenge, which I would say can influence the whole debate also on the value side, is accountability of the European institutions that are making some decisions, and perception in the public who is actually in charge. Because if we look at the European Union, we have only the European Parliament that is directly elected by the citizens of Europe. So if we don't address those issues, and I think that this debate currently is a right one within the European Union, within its member states, how to proceed, then yes, in the long run, we will be facing challenges not only of attractiveness, but also of a certain set of values. However, I really think that this is not so much about currently a kind of crisis in the way as probably people like to think that now we are losing some kind of global attractiveness vis-a-vis, let's say, simply influence that is sometimes exerted by certain countries through financial aids, through financial means, not putting also some of those usual issues that we want to see, also some certain reforms, some certain change, some certain values.
Before I turn to Mr. Cazeneuve and ask him whether he's as bullish as his two colleagues, I want to say that I want to bring the audience in right after this. So please, we already have the first two. Please collect your questions. I'll be turning to you just in a second. Mr. Cazeneuve, as bullish as your two colleagues?
I would like to say several words about the question you asked to my colleagues, how to make Europe more attractive. It's a very important question. First of all, if we want Europe to be more attractive, you have to organize an industrial policy in Europe for innovation, technological transfers, in order to help the industries which want to come in Europe to have the best conditions if these companies want to invest in innovation, in competitivity. We have also to organize a high level of professional training and formation for the young people. We are working with our friends from Germany about the 50th anniversary of the Élysée Treaty, and when the General de Gaulle and Adenauer 50 years ago decided to put on the table the cooperation between our two countries, they decided to organize a certain number of links between our two countries concerning the youth. If we are able, during the next years, to organize the mobility of youth in Europe in order to offer to the youth of Europe the best level of formation, best schools, the situation of competitivity and of attractivity of Europe will be certainly better than it is now. We have also to go further in the construction of the internal market. The Commission is working about this subject. We have a certain number of meetings between ministers about this question. I think it's very strategic and important to go further in the construction of the internal market in order to have a strong market in Europe, able to be confronted to other economies and other countries in Europe. And we have also to create the condition of the competitivity of our economy. I see on the screen a question. Cazeneuve is explaining that there is a new growth compact, but there is also a problem of competitivity in France. What are you going to do? It's a good question. We are confronted in France to a competitivity problem. It's not only the case of France. Other countries in Europe are confronted to these problems. What are we going together to do in order to overcome this difficulty? First, innovation, technological transfers, investment in the industrial policy, but also we have to accept to be confronted to the question of the cost of work. And we are going to overcome these problems by taking a certain number of courageous decisions in order to be able to be more competitive. And if we want to be attractive, we have to be competitive.
Okay. So now is your chance to question, challenge, or support the bullishness of the three ministers. Sir, please go right ahead.
Pavel Konzel, World Economic Forum. My question is related to the topic of this panel, which is, will global economic restructuring bring the West back to the game? And West is not just European Union, and until now the whole debate focused on the European Union. I would like to know your opinion, all the panelists, on the position of other countries which are part of the West, United States, Canada, Australia. How this economic crisis, in your opinion, is going to change their relative position towards the emerging countries, and as a bloc, is there still something like the West, or will different ways of tackling economic crisis and different economic positions, will they break, in fact, maybe a bloc called the West, and will it be exchanged by multilateral institutions or multilateral places?
Okay, I'd like to take a couple of questions. Can we move the microphone over here, please? We'll take a second. So I'll just recap the question. What about the Americans, and will it break the West? Is my quick summary of the question.
Michael Salin from Sweden. On a different note, Minister, you inspired me a lot when you talked about your country and your experience of the difference, if there is one, between the economics and the politics of the EU and its involvement. And you mentioned the year 2001 being very crucial for Croatia, and so it was for another country in the Balkans, namely Fyrom Macedonia. Names vary, as we know. In the latter case, that same year, the EU had found that it must now, having created all the instruments of crisis management, do something in order to resume full responsibility for the crisis management resulting from the civil war in that country. So my question is, do you think, after this event and the events following that the EU has somehow given up on its ambition to also be a player in international crisis management, leaving that for others, or is that is something else that is important to convey the image of the EU and enhance its attractiveness? Thank you.
So why don't we have the first question addressed to the two gentlemen go first, and maybe that last question I understand to be directed to Minister Pusic.
Yep. So, okay. Well, indeed, you know, being within the European Union, you start to become very Eurocentric at some point. Talking also about the West, but I fully agree that, of course, we see here North America, we see Australia, but look again, if we look at general pictures, and of course there have been some long-standing debate, for instance, whether United States and Europe at large share the same now goals. That is there an interest? I think that every decade we are discussing doomsday scenarios that, for instance, United States and Europe are kind of drifting apart. Australia in this regard is probably a little bit a different case. But one thing that I can say is that actually in last, well, about 10 years, we have seen a commonality of interest to act in a global stage by the West, like in the regions of Afghanistan, there have been alliances in Iraq. So what we have seen is that actually there is a lot of talk about shifting interests in the United States towards Asia. Also, we see European Union actually talking for more contacts, but I really don't think that we are so far apart in this respect, and we still have the same set of values. We have the same set of organizational structures. They are actually still effective, and if you look at different organizations, different structural issues, we still see that the West as such is, I think, playing a very important role on the global scale, addressing those issues. However, what we also see is that number of challenges is increasing, and whether we are ready to cope with all of them at once, that's a different question, and whether that is so much related with economic and financial situation, I would doubt. I think that this is more complex words than probably we could have.
So you're not concerned about the pivot, the term that you use? I'm, by the way, told I shouldn't say it's pivot, it's rebalancing, as the Americans.
Well, we have had some certain concerns. We have been discussing that with our allies within NATO format. But I think that it was Craig Kennedy who was quoting actually Willy Brandt the other day about his speech at the founding of GMF back in 1972, where there was a complaint that the United States are shifting towards Asia and leaving Europe. So I think this is a really debate. We have to work, of course, to ensure commonality of interest, commonality of values, to work on alliances, but I really think that this is more about process, it's not about a doomsday scenario.
40 years of shift.
More than that.
Let me just interject something that I didn't know, that there's Twitter polls, and ignorant about Twitter, that's news to me. So that poll says, what does the future hold for the West? Stagnation 9%, inevitable decline 0%, restructuring and return 27%, dominance of Asia 45%. So here's what those following us online think. Mr. Cazeneuve.
Yes, I know that. I see that everybody is very optimistic in this room. The question of the relationships between Europe and the United States and Canada. We are unable to be strong together if inside the West, Europe is weak. And during the last few months, even if the crisis comes from the United States, the situation of certain number of financial institutions, banks in the United States were at the origin of the crisis in Europe. Today, because there is in the United States a federal organization, a high level of political integration, they are able to overcome their problems by using the impact of the federal institutions. In Europe, we are unable to do that. When you are confronted to the crisis with a certain number of difficulties, strong difficulties for our money, the euro, we are unable to take the good decision at the good moment. It's too late, but sometimes it's too early, because the level of political integration in Europe is not efficient. If we want to be strong in front of the United States, in order to be strong together, we don't have to be weak in this space. That's why it's very important, my colleague Edgars was speaking about that at the beginning of our meeting. It's very important to organize more solidarity in Europe and more political integration. And the difficulties for us is that if we say to the people in Europe, we are going to begin with political integration without speaking about the emergency, solidarity, and all the other questions, the people in Europe will say no. We want Europe to answer to emergency. If Europe is today able to answer to emergencies, we should accept to go further in political integration. And if we say we want Europe to answer to emergencies by creating new mechanism of solidarity, but we don't want more political integration, a certain number of countries will say, why do you want more solidarity if we are unable together to have common budgetary policy, the fiscal compact and other process. So it's very important to have solidarity and integration both. If we succeed in creating this dynamic, we shall be stronger in the West, in the relationship, in our relationship with the States, and the States will be happy to see Europe being able to organize this institution and solidarity in Europe.
We have the question about crisis, the EU's capacity, but crisis management. Can I ask you to be as quick as you can, because I want to get one more question in before I'm told the buses are outside to take you all to dinner, and I suppose there's a few of us that are already hungry.
I was just going to ask you to make 3 comments unrelated to the question, but now I won't ask you this. Now I won't ask you this. So the question was specifically Macedonia and EU's capacity to manage crisis and manage, be a player there. Actually, through active involvement, it hasn't really worked either, at least in our part of the world, it hasn't worked either for Europe or for the United States to be a successful players in crisis management and institution building or states building and stabilizing. What has worked primarily for the United States, in the case of the United States, is to be a successful player in stopping conflicts, in sort of prevent or stopping actual fighting. But my experience, or our experience, is that after that, there is no such thing as the international community or the European Union that is going to come in and actually take over the responsibility and do something for you. The closest I think we can come is to share something within the region, because issues and problems and maybe some solutions are similar. But basically one of the things that in my head I see as sort of the process of accession to the European Union is developing a collective consciousness of the responsibility for oneself. You have to be able to assume the responsibility for your own country and your own environment. And in the early stages, you need a lot of help. I think in some ways it's easier to do this regionally than the European Union as a whole, and maybe individual countries.
That was quick, thank you. So let's try to get in one quick question with quick answers, if I can get that commitment from the three ministers. So I think we had a question over here. I don't know where the microphone... Here you go.
Yes, Veikos Polits, Latvian MOD. Mr. Cazeneuve finished his line saying that Europe must be strong, and I agree. Europe must be strong, but it is as strong as its weakest link, and I'm not even sure whether Greece is the weakest link. In addition to that, we also must know what is the family. So therefore I have a question to Madame Pusic and also to Monsieur Cazeneuve. So you, Madame, said that Europe must expand to its natural borders. So could you elaborate? What are the natural borders of Europe? And Monsieur Cazeneuve, I'd like to know whether the position has changed since Monsieur Sarkozy on eventual membership of Turkey. Thank you.
That was two questions, and the borders of Europe, I think, I don't know for how many 100 years that's been discussed, so that's a quick question to get us to get us out to dinner. Can you take that on in a 60-second?
Absolutely. It depends on the countries on the border of the continent that actually do want to join, and I would take that as a criteria. Not saying, this part of the country is part of Europe or not, if it's within the territory of the continent, any part of the country. The other criteria is, does it want to join? If it doesn't want to join, there is absolutely no reason to go into it, because then it doesn't work. Then the reforms don't work, and then it doesn't work as a project.
Yes, the position of France regarding the problems of Turkey. Yes, it has changed during the last few weeks after the presidential election in France. We want to have normal relationships with Turkey, and we have a certain number of meetings at a good level with the Prime Minister and the President of Turkey in order to normalize our relationships. We hope that we shall be able to speak with Turkey about all the questions, economical questions, political questions, in a normal way and with the willing of being constructive. We shall see how this discussion will evaluate during the next month, and I hope that we shall succeed in having good bilateral relationship with Turkey.
So thank you, and thank you all. I think I've learned from this conversation that all roads to global Europe lead through the euro crisis. So the euro crisis remains the dominant framework of thinking, even when we try to project outward. No outward projection without solving this problem, as we've had abundantly clear in this panel. And the second thing is, I ought to go out with optimism and bullishness. And with that optimism, we can now turn to dinner. And the buses outside that I'm told will leave to the Latvian Society, scheduled at now, 7 o'clock, now, if you can make it, in 15 minutes and in 30 minutes. Thank you all.